Hey, everyone. It's Friday afternoon here in Southern California, Friday evening on the East Coast, late Friday evening over there in Europe, and it might even be Saturday, depending on where you are in the world. But no matter where you are, it is time for Cinema Crusaders. That's right, Cinema Crusaders, the show where we talk about older movies that, generally speaking, have to be at least 10 years old, but movies that deserve a second look and allow us to talk about one of our favorite things, which is cinema, which is film, which is movies. So we are so excited to be here and talking to you about a great movie from 2003. It's The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise and directed by Edward Zwick. And we will get into that in just a moment. But before we do that, I need to introduce my fellow cinema crusaders. So, first off, I see that one of our Crusaders has popped off, so hopefully he will make a reappearance. But that allows me to introduce this man. He is a filmmaker himself. In fact, he's an award-winning filmmaker for a variety of different movies, but most recently, he has been nominated for awards for Waiting for the Grow, Coiffeur Extraordinaire, which is tied into his wonderful comic book series, Bob Non-Union Psychic. I'm talking about the man behind Warehouse 9 Pro, none other than Lance Lucero. How you doing, Lance?
Howdy, howdy. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, awesome. And I know that you fairly recently took an amazing trip, and we got to see some of those pictures, man. Those were incredible as well. So
You
glad
bet.
you had a great trip and glad you're back. And I know you're busy working, so I'm always thankful when you have time to come on the show and talk to us about cinema and everything. So welcome.
Good to be here. I like it. I mean, this is where it's at. All things cinema.
Awesome. So, the next person we've got coming up here is a man. He is my partner in Raincross Press. He has also written Symbols of Liberty and Mr. Happy. He's an amazing artist and a writer, a dual threat. He is also the voice behind some characters in various role-playing games that he's in out there. He's just a really talented and fun guy to be around, and he knows a lot about cinema as well, and I love having him as part of Cinema Crusaders. I'm talking about none other than Jeff, Mr. Happy Oracy. How you doing, Jeff?
Konnichiwa, everyone.
Aren't you supposed to put bitches after that, or is that only if
Konnichiwa, bitches!
Yeah, the Dave Chappelle show.
Moshi, motherfucker!
And now we're going to get sued by the Dave Chappelle show, but it was worth it. So, and last but not least, he is a writer for Omen Comics, for Revelation Comics, and for Raincross Press. He's an incredibly talented writer. He's also involved in various role-playing games, so check him out in that as well. He's a very good friend and an amazingly creative person who I can always call upon to have just incredible insight on cinema, on books, and a whole host of other things. Check him out on social media and check him out on these podcasts. I was talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Well, let's just put it this way. I would happily talk about this movie for free.
I'll buy that for $1.
I think you are.
Yeah. This is one of those movies that I go back a long time with. My family watches this movie a lot. I tend to watch it every so often. I just think that there are a lot of really great performances in it, and this is the movie that kind of launched Ken Watanabe. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
At least in the United States, definitely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things I'll say right off the bat is a lot of times with these movies. This movie is 2003, so it's 20 years old. It doesn't feel like they're that old. When you brought this movie up as one we could do, I was like, surely this movie came out in 2014, 2015, something like that. Nope, It's 20 years old, but it still looks great. It's still translates, and I think it's a great story. We're going to get into that in just a moment. So, but before we do, we break everything down. I want to kind of go around. I know for a couple of us, this was the first time we watched it. For a couple of us, for me at least, I haven't revisited this movie for a while, so it's kind of like me being reintroduced. So I want to get first impressions from all of you on the movie. Just what is your first impression? What are your first thought on the film now that you watched it in preparation for the show? So I'm going to go to Lance first. First impressions on the film.
I was pleasantly surprised. It's been on the radar for 20 years. I mean, it's it's always been floating around, and I've never engaged for for various reasons, but I was pleasantly surprised. And the aspect of, Edward Zwick, the director, we're talking glory here. I mean, that was a heck of an endorsement. So I'm like, okay, I'm really interested now. And, the supporting cast, who quite a few of them now have launched pretty decent careers on both sides of the pond, which is really good to see that this movie put some great performers in the spotlight, and they were able to move on to a very illustrious careers. I mean, I like that idea of seeing those new faces. But once again, this movie's 20 years old. And you're right. I thought it was like 10, 12 years old.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I agree with you. When I give my first impressions, there are a couple people that really stood out for me as well. But first, I want to go to Jeff. What are your first impressions of the film?
Well, I gotta say, just given what you two have just said, this is the strength of the director and the other people involved, your director of photography and people like that, and the strength of the cast, that this is something you can get away with a well-done period piece. I think if you look at films like this, like Gladiator, like Dance of the Wolves, they have this timeless quality because there's nothing to give them an age that reflects our modern period. They're not stuck in the 70s, 80s, or 90s because they're removed by up to 100 years or so. So if it's shot well and acted well and everything is just encapsulated beautifully, they truly become timeless. You can watch it again and again, and it looks like a modern movie, even though it's 20 years old. It has that just beautiful quality to it. As for the film itself, I'm a bit of a, I don't know the proper word. I know there's one for like Anglophile for the English, but I'm a bit of a Japanese file, having grown up on things like Chambara, samurai films, and ninja movies, and of course anime. And so this film is not historically accurate. It does have some nods to history and some nods to real characters, but it is romantically purposeful, like any good piece of art that is not a documentary. It sweeps you up in the romanticism of the Meiji Restoration, this period of transition and from the feudal system of the samurai and the shogun into the new Japanese empire, the Japanese empire that's entering into the modern world and is engaging in industrialism. And so it's beautiful, it's romantic, it's poetic, and like any good Asian story that I've ever seen, ultimately tragic.
Especially Japanese from this period. So
Yeah, look, I'm like Chinese, Japanese, Korean. They all love their tragedies, man. Like they're taking a page out of like the Greeks' book. Give us the tragedies.
Well, it's not like English literature doesn't have its share of tragedies as well.
Sure,
So,
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Shakespeare's loaded with tragedy.
Yep. So with that, I'm going to go on to a man who is an English professor, literally, Mr. Steve Shadwig Sellers. What are your first impressions of the film for everybody out there?
Yeah, this was a movie that I hadn't seen for a long time, but it was one of those that I've seen periodically over the years. And so there were elements that kind of stuck with me. And even then, there were things that I had absolutely forgotten about. Like I had forgotten that William Atherton was in this movie. And that guy has one of the most punchable faces that you'll ever find on film.
Absolutely.
Like just all the characters that he plays are just so horrible people. And this one's no exception. So it was nice to see that. The historical drama and all of that, just kind of swept in, with the end of the samurai, which did in a broad sense happen, but not necessarily the way they show it. And also, I just really love the arc, the character arc of Nathan Algren. He's a very similar character starting out as Frank Hopkins from Hidalgo that we talked about last time. But I kind of feel like it's a little different in that, yeah, they're dealing with some of the same issues. They're both dealing with PTSD from the war. They're dealing with regrets over what happened, and they're both introduced to different cultures, and that cultural shift ends up awakening them to who they really are. But I think in the case of Algren, I think it's kind of his thing is that I am trying to make peace with my past. because I have seen, peace and a way of life that's been missing in my life. I've been, the idea of honor and all of these things, and that makes him become the warrior he needs to be in this fight. But also, in a way, he's not really completely the hero of the movie. That's Ken Watanabe's character. I mean, that's his character, and his whole arc, is basically, coming face to face with death, and embracing it as a warrior, and embracing it as somebody who's fighting for Japan, and to make his death mean something. And so I just thought that was a really great story, and the way that they told it was really good, and it was better than I had remembered, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
This
is probably one of the best examples, and this can be a movie trope of somebody going native that I've ever seen in a film. A lot of times it feels like it's just sort of plot driven, but this, like Nathan's arc in here, feels so organic.
It felt believable. The only thing I would say is the man has to be superhuman to have been able to get to that level of proficiency with the katana that quickly. That was be the only real life criticism I have.
Well,
But it's a movie.
I'm gonna
so-
say it works because Tom Cruise got that proficient because Tom Cruise is
Well,
a friggin' machine.
But that's
Yeah.
Tom
I
Cruise.
did like I did like the way they started it off. He tries to carry the sword like it's a cavalry saber.
Yeah.
Like the way he's holding it looks like how you would hold a cavalry saber. And that is absolutely spot on for that character, because he would have
Hola.
Hey, what's up, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
good
seeing
attention
him
to
later
detail.
on actually holding the katana more properly, you can just the way that Cruise shows those little small details in his performance, I think elevates that.
Fun fact: Cruise
I agree.
trained so hard with the sword that his forearms got so big from wielding the sword and practicing swordcraft that he had to get new jackets because he couldn't get his arms through his clothes anymore.
Well, I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's worth getting into later that
Kendo does do that to you.
whatever you think of Tom Cruise, he puts himself out there in his roles.
Oh, he
and
always
you
goes
can't say that
110.
he doesn't work hard, and all that. So,
Although I will say that I still think he was doing his best Richard Chamberlain. I was like,
There was a bit of a Shogun in
It
there.
was
Nice.
just screaming to me.
Oh.
The first vision I had of him with his mustache, his beard, his shaggy head, I was like, okay, that's total Richard Chamberlain right there.
I love that miniseries and I love that book.
It's
So,
a great, it was great. But that I did chuckle. I was like, okay, let's enjoy the movie because that's Richard Chamberlain.
I will say for me, my first impressions, like Steve, I was revisiting this movie after being away from it for a while. It still is so enjoyable to me. I'm not naive enough to know that samurai in this period in particular in Japanese history is nowhere near that romantic and everything, but I appreciate it. I'll also say that this is a good movie to give you a very on the surface introduction to Zen Buddhism and Bushido, so those concepts. I also like to see the conflict between those very Eastern concepts and then Western philosophy, and Algren is kind of dealing with that, even though he very much respects Bushido and takes a lot of that in. To us still, even to those who respect that, it's very foreign to us as Westerners, and we can't fully live that, I don't think, a lot of the time, because it's just not who we are. We have different, ways of approaching life in that way. But and to me, that meant a lot to me personally when I first saw the movie, and still does today, because I'm one of those eclectic people that likes to go around the world and look at the stuff, and I take what I like and I leave the rest, So, I make no apologies for it. I also have to say that as far as cast goes, and I'm going to love talking about this with you all, I love all of the cast. But once again, like Hidalgo, I think that the main actor is overshadowed in a good way by all those around him. And to me, two really stood out that I love. I love Billy Connolly's character in here, who is primarily a stand-up comic, but I think he comes off perfectly as a, badass, foul-mouthed sergeant, in the Army at this time.
He's really good at drama.
Yeah, I've known some of those
With due
people.
respect, you could shove it up your ass.
Yeah.
That was just great. Great moment.
I love that. And then the other person I love, and Jeff is going to know, I know loves this guy as well. He's an incredible martial artist, but he's also...
You must be talking about Hiroyuki Sanada.
Yes. He is amazing in everything I've ever seen him in. He's a great actor. He's a great martial artist. I just think he's fantastic. I can't take my eyes off of him whenever he's on screen, no matter what.
That's one of the... That's the charisma factor again. He's a scene stealer, and this, I mean, seen him in other movies, Sunshine and other movies. It's like right when I saw him, I'm like, hey, that's him, and he's a scene stealer, and it's like that's the mark of charisma and a very amazing performer. I mean, that's a rarity.
Absolutely. I mean, even in movies, I don't know how you guys felt about it. I don't think it was a horrible movie, but it's not a great movie by any stretch of imagination. The most recent Mortal Kombat movie, he's in that movie. The few moments he's in the movie, he steals he makes the movie.
3 movies he's been in recently, you'll recognize him when you see him. There's, of course, Mortal Kombat, there's Bullet Train, and then there's John Wick 4. And in each of those movies, like Lance said, he's a scene stealer.
It's like Lance said, it's the charisma. It's a black hole of charisma. It just sucks you in, and you can't escape. And be honest, you don't want to escape. You are sad when he's not on the screen anymore. I mean, he is a treasure, and I love watching him. And I'm so glad. As far as I know, I think this is the first time I saw him in a Western movie. This is the first time I saw him in a Western movie. And I'm so glad that he was introduced to Western audiences.
She's rich.
More Western movies, yeah. So with that, let's get right into to the cast. And I don't want to bury the lead. I don't want to. If you want to spend a lot of time on him, we can. But I do want to mention him briefly and go around the horn. Tom Cruise in this movie, so I do want to give him a little bit of talk because we skipped over Viggo Mortensen almost completely in Hidalgo. So I'm going to go to Steve first. Some thoughts on Tom Cruise's performance before we go to supporting cast, which is, I think, where the real strength of this movie lies. So
I think he's very good in this. I mean, the thing with Cruise is that he does put in a good performance, but he's not the best performer in the film. Like there are at least a couple of people that overshadow him in this movie, and yet it's not because of anything he's doing. And generally speaking, I like Tom Cruise in a lot of different things as a performer. Off screen is a little different, obviously, but as a performer, this guy has a track record of picking very good scripts, and because of that, he makes a lot of great movies. I mean, there was a whole period of years, between Oblivion, Edge of Tomorrow, the Mission Impossible films. Jack Reacher, things like that, where it was just film after film that was great, and I think that Cruise has a very good sense of what works in a script for him, and he knows how to play to that script, and that definitely shows in this movie. He has that charisma, but the thing of it is that he gets into the character here, and there's a lot of subtle performance in this that you don't necessarily see. When he's trying to be Ethan Hunt, they're like, you can sort of see like him putting down the cup of beer, like towards the end when he kind of realizes, I can't escape in the bottle anymore. I have to go and save my friend. That just and he never makes it too obvious. He's not hamming it up. It's he just kind of stops for a moment and then kind of looks in the camera. And then he slowly puts the glass down, because he's kind of committed at that point to his decision. All of that is very subtle acting and it's very good. So yes, you were going to say?
I was going to say, I think a lot of that is direction as well. So
Yep. That as well. I mean, a good director knows how to use good actors. And not only that, he knows how to manage egos. And Tom Cruise has a pretty big ego. Yeah. You have to give him that. But it is balanced with everybody else in the film, and I think that's Cruise, swallowing his pride for the good of the production, but it's also the director doing a damn good job in managing the talent he has.
I have to say, on top of everything else, the man especially recent science fiction films, he pretty much has an amazing batting average on putting out great science fiction films. I don't know why, but I don't know how much it's him or whatever, but he really does. Jeff, thoughts on Tom Cruise in this film?
I think Tom Cruise is pretty much flawless in this film, and I think his being overshadowed, if indeed he is the result of the character and playing to the character. Now, I don't personally know how much ego Tom Cruise has. I know he can be a bit nutty in public, but I think on the set he is a consummate perfectionist, a consummate professional. I don't think you'll ever find a video clip or audio clip of him screaming at somebody because they were walking across the background like Christian Bale did. Totally unprofessional behavior. But this guy when he's on a set, he's all about making the movie, and it shows here. He doesn't, even if he is the featured actor, he doesn't have to be the main focus all the time. Like you said, Ken Watanabe is the hero of this piece, and Nathan is not. He's he's not a white savior. He's not that troop. He is an observer of history. He has come here fully knowing, having seen what happens when technology meets primitivism. What happens? He knows full well the samurai are doomed to lose, and Nathan wants to die, and that makes his choice of joining them all the easier. And so that's his arc. And the beautiful thing is, in the midst of this, even when he thinks he's probably going to die at the end, he still finds a reason to live. And so it's just a masterful piece of, like what Steve said, subtle acting throughout.
It's interesting you said that about the white savior, because I was telling Steve before we came online that this movie was much better received in Japan than it was here in the United States. In Japan, they thought it was, very it honored that period. It was respectful of the culture and a whole host of things. Meanwhile, critics here, back when it was released and now, have tried to bury this film, saying that it was disrespectful and cultural appropriation.
I will rail against that. I will rail against that. And here's why the Japanese are right. For once, first of all, it's their history, and they know their history better than we do. And the person that Ken Watanabe's character was based on, a gentleman whose name is, let me see if I can say this right, Saigo Takamori.
Yeah.
He, like I said, they do a few things to romanticize a few things. Takamori was not afraid to use firearms. As a matter of fact, they only resorted to melee weapons when they run out of cannonballs and bullets. He thought Japan was pressing into the future too quickly. And part of this is because the samurai class was getting diminished. And it wasn't entirely noble. The samurai class had a lot of privileges. They didn't have to pay taxes. They had a, how do you call it, a burimono, where you could slay somebody for insolence. There's actually a scene that is cut out of the film where Sonata takes off a guy's head for mocking him, which the audience would have been like, well, screw the samurai, they're just a bunch of wandering murderers. So that got excised out of the film, which is too bad, because it's a really cleverly shot piece there.
Well, it's the same as the knights in shining armors. They were romanticized and they were complete jerks.
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. You have a very wealthy, privileged class, and a lot of them were even looking forward to the Meiji era, because as samurai, you've just had 200 years of peace when Japan locked itself down and there were no wars. And the samurai were forbidden by their class nature from doing anything but being warriors. So they watched as the mercantile classes just outpaced them. So it was only these diehard holdouts who really wanted to do this. And the climatic scene at the end where they do have this battle was so important to the Japanese people and even the emperor himself that they declared Bushido to be this national thing, that the one thing that they kept, like honoring the past, because this tragically heroic sacrifice so impacted them that they honored it, and he pardoned all of the renegades after the fact.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and Lance brought up a great point. I mean, it's feudalism in the East, and feudalism died a long, slow, hard death in the West versus a very quick, rather, fairly quick, as historical terms, as we measure historically in the East. It's also interesting. Lance brought up Shogun. The character or the historical figure you mentioned, Jeff, was the last Tokugawa shogunate.
Yeah.
And Shogun is all about the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate.
Tokugawa shut down the country in the 1600s, and we used gunboat diplomacy to open up Japan's borders in the 1800s.
Yeah, so it's like you're talking about the bookends of that. So with that, you love how I did that little segue there. I'll go to Lance now. And what do you think about Tom Cruise in this film before we move on to the supporting cast?
Well, we're going back 20 years, which is, I think he was, whatever ideology, whatever goes on outside of the movies can stay there, because I do think he's all about the entertainment 100%. He's all in. I think he's always all in. He's not phoning it in. He's working hard to do the best he can.
Yeah.
And I did like this wasn't a white savior movie, which I thought was fantastic, because going in, I thought, okay, he's going to save the day. Everything's going to be, this is a Hollywood movie. Is it going to go that route? It didn't. I was surprised and pleased. And the aspect of how he played it as a fish out of water, which I think was the selling point to me. He was completely a fish out of water, which made his observations a little bit more poignant. So I think that was, script writing wise, story wise, directing wise, I think that's what saved it. Otherwise, it would have been filled with tropes. It would have been the white savior thing. It would have been everything that we can predict. But this film was not predictable. I went into it with some apprehensions, and I was surprised that I didn't see those tropes. I was like, great, this is awesome. But the fish out of water aspect, I think, worked the best. And I think that's where he can take a back seat to these other really great performers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that he did very well, and the director and the scriptwriter did well, was immerse him completely into the Japanese village life of that time and appreciate it and show it. It didn't show it in all its ugliness, but it showed a fairly good picture of it, through rose-colored lenses of what it was like, even to the point where
I love his first interaction where he steps into a home without taking off his muddy boots, and he's immediately shamed by the fact that he's just dirtied somebody's floor when he realizes that's what he's done. Nobody harasses him about it. They're just like, they start cleaning up, and he gets it. So like Nathan is not a man who lacks sensitivity.
I will say I saw the muddy boots in there, and I was just like, oh no, because that's a major no-no in Japan. You leave these shoes outside.
Yeah. Well, it was in our. That translates to other cultures as well. It's like my grandmother would find her chancla wherever it was in the house and throw it at you if you came in the house.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So with that, I do want to go. Then I'm going to start with Jeff. I want to go around the horn on supporting cast. I want you to pick, one or two of the supporting cast and go ahead and talk about, what their performances were like for you, because there's a lot of stuff I want to get to in this film.
Well, and I guess I'll go with being the martial arts geek I am. I'm going to go with Hiroyuki Sanada.
Okay.
He does so much with does he even have a line of dialogue or nothing?
It's all in Japanese. So.
Yeah, it's all in Japanese. So you have to read the subtitles, but even without the subtitles, his performance is so striking. I think you would just get it. He has this magnificence in terms of his intensity, and like Lance said, his charisma. He is a modern actor born to play samurai. I mean, he has that whole Toshiro Mifune, that Sonny Chiba sort of intensity down, that laser-like focus that he's obviously acquired from years of discipline in martial arts training. And he is such a wonderful foil for Tom Cruise as this unexpected rival, this guy who wants to, to punish the gaijin they captured. But then watching him slowly just kind of be forced into respecting Nathan, as Nathan has come to accept and respect the life that these people lead. And and there's that wonderful moment where they're sparring with their boken, and they stop, and it's clearly it is a draw. They both would have sliced each other's throats, and like the look on his face is like, never saw that coming. But that's like, okay, you're finally one of us. He finally accepts him, and I love that moment so much.
He also has an incredible ability to emote with his face and eyes.
And that's what I loved about, like, if you watch old samurai films, there is so much that is just these long holds on faces with no dialogue, and he completely encapsulates that. Like Jim Jumarsh took this lesson to heart when he did Ghost Dog with Forrest Whitaker. And if you watch that movie, you'll feel the first half of the movie is very samurai, where there's like these long, slow tracking shots of Forrest Whitaker just standing there and looking so stoic. And that is samurai to its soul.
I will also say I'm wondering how much of that, and if anybody's watching this, please put it down in the comments if you know. And by the way, hit like and subscribe on our channel. But how much of this has to do with kabuki theater, which still is part of the training there? Because from what I understand, besides if you're not wearing a mask, most emotions are all conveyed through various faces.
Well, the Japanese as a people, unless you look at some of the younger generations, they are not strongly emotive. Those who come from previous generations who are like more traditional, there's always that public face versus your private face.
Right.
And that's a shield, that's an armor that you wear. You don't do anything unseemly, you don't act out of turn, you don't act out. And so it's an Asian sort of stoicism that I just love seeing on the screen.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to Lance next. Lance, anybody, one or two people in the supporting cast that really stood out that you'd like to comment on?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Everything said about Sonata is agreeable. And then when we get to Watanabe.
Mm-hmm. I love this. This is the film that introduced me to Watanabe.
I think, what we see in him is not just the stoic leader, but there is that one moment where he does the kabuki to the village, which is completely like breaking his character as a leader. That dynamic is a very hard thing to pull off performance-wise, because everybody's so used to the through line of a character. Just that's what they are, and then the moment when that's broken, depending on the storyline, some people get sucked out of the story. I didn't get sucked out of the story because it was part of the culture. He was there to entertain. He was part of the community, even though he was the leader. So I think that was an interesting character arc. It was humanistic. It kind of showed, okay, look, it's not all business. They still entertain, live, eat, do everything else. So I like when those little elements are implemented in certain stories, because other times things seem so serious. Like in a Christopher Nolan movie, some things are so serious every waking moment. There's not an ounce of humor. There's not an ounce of joke. It's like, that's not life. There's
never a break.
Yeah, it's like, that's a little too much. Whereas I like this, it broke it up a little bit. There was that one moment, and that's all it took. And we moved on with the story. So that's great acting. That's great acting when a performer can do that. So I was all for that. I was very happy to see that in the film.
What do you think about Mike's comment here? How much of stoicism on screen is what the movie intends, and how much is what we're reading into the performance? What do you think about that, Lance?
Well, I think sometimes it could be a question of the performer not knowing what to do. Now let's be honest here. You know what I mean? There are times where you can take footage. You could have yelled cut and the camera's still rolling, but you can see a performer thinking, and it's like, well, I can use that as a reaction shot because it's lit. It's movie magic. So we have to understand that this is a collaborative effort. And what you use to get your performer to get there kind of is your problem. But really, it's up to the director to help them get there, but it's up to the performer to really get there, okay? You can't handhold them. The script's there. Everybody's ready to go. You got to perform. And movie magic movie magic sneaks in. But remember, this is planned. This is scripted. The camera's set up. It's lit. They have their marks to hit. So there are times where people kind of overblow the performance of certain actors and what have you. But it's also, look, they're there doing their job. And there's a lot of people helping them to do it. Makeup, wardrobe, lighting. I mean, I think it's anybody's game, really. So long as they get there and you have that moment, you win. It's a win. You move on. But I'm not gonna browbeat it to say, oh, a performer's gonna get no. Come on now, people are helping that performer get there. All right, it's not all on their shoulders.
I will say, do you think it's too far a stretch to say that? To me, Ken Watanabe has that presence that I associated with someone like, and it just occurred to me as you were talking, Morgan Freeman. He really does. He has a voice that soothes me in the same way, a presence, a delivery style. He really does feel like the Japanese Morgan Freeman, for lack of a better comparison.
I think in a sense that's a decent comparison, but I think Watanabe has more range because I think Morgan Freeman's been a parody of himself now for decades. He's just a parody of himself. Do we see real acting anymore beyond a Shawshank Redemption? Since he's played God, he's like a parody of himself.
True.
I don't see a stretch in any performances that he does, but he is a presence. His voice is like butter. I mean, He is a presence, but I don't see him as good of an actor as Watanabe because there's range, and you can see that from movie to movie that he is playing a different character. He's not himself.
He's not playing the same character all the time.
He's kind of leaned into the Jack Nicholson thing. It was like, I can just be me and get that paycheck.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to Steve next. Expand on one or two of the supporting cast that you want to talk about. And as you start, I'm going to go turn on a light because it's getting dark over here. So I'm beginning to become the Prince of Darkness over here in the shadows. So I'm going to come out.
No problem. Anyway, I will, before I say that, kind of raise this question. I think that Watanabe probably does have kabuki experience. You just get that from the whole kabuki scene. Like he's able to. He just feels like he's just part of that. And you kind of look at him and you think, he might very well have been doing that before he did this movie. I really would not be shocked if he had some kabuki in his time before, when he was acting in Japan. It would not surprise me. Anyway, as far as the other characters and actors, I'm going to start with the guy who played Graham. I just can't remember his name. This guy looks like it. Yeah.
Timothy Spall, and you stole that. I was going to bring him up. So
yeah, he's very, very good. He's very, very good. He kind of looks like this Lewis Carroll type of character, like this caricature that you sort of see, like he could have been the Mad Hatter or something like that.
Exactly.
He just looks like that.
Spall played Peter Pettigrew in Harry Potter.
Yeah,
I think he did. Yeah. I think he did. Yeah, he's very good. I mean, he does a lot of different roles, and I always forget his name, and I always forget it's him. But when you recognize him, it's like, oh yeah, it's that guy. He's got a lot of range, and he does. And even within this particular role, it's like he seems like a very cowardly type of character at first. Somebody who is just kind of going along with things. He kind of says, well, I'm this guy that speaks too much truth to really be in and really be in England, but. So I just translate other people's lies. I just thought that was like a really, really good moment there. But then later on, you sort of see that he's not just that guy, because when he's with Tom Cruise trying to get Katsumoto out of prison, he pulls off this whole thing about, oh, this guy's the president of the United States. You got to let him in. And the way he portrays that, he's very convincing as this guy who's pushing around these Japanese soldiers with guns. And it's like, even though he knows that, the whole thing is a bluff. I mean, he pulls off that bluff extremely convincingly, better than you would expect. Yeah, it is.
He has an arc, which is interesting. He has a very similar arc Well, you know what? I think he has his own unique arc, but
Yeah.
I think he really is that person at the beginning of the movie, and by the end
Yeah.
of the movie, he has a newfound respect,
Yeah.
for the culture and for the people. So
He is the one who has to tell the tale. So he, in the end, ends up speaking truth, because he is the one who delivers the truth and spreads the story from Nathan's perspective, because he has Nathan's journal. So so that's basically his role, is to basically embrace truth rather than translate lies. He gets to translate truth for once.
definitely. Now, since you stole mine, there are a couple guys that I would talk about the Emperor, and I kind of, that one's kind of hit or miss for me. He comes off. I don't know a ton about the first Meiji Emperor, but he comes off very effeminate to me, which
It's
was
very foppish. I was
yeah,
kind of like, I don't know about that.
yeah. So it's like that's a whole long discussion. I really don't want
Yeah,
to get
he's
into.
a
He
long
does
way
show
from a
strength at the end, though. I
Yeah.
will say he has an arc as well,
Yeah,
because
but
Katsumoto inspires him to be the emperor that he wanted him to be.
Emperor Meiji is definitely not a Tokugawa.
but yeah, but even at that point, even at the end, he looks like the guy. If you breathed on him too much, he would fall over. So I don't know. I mean, I understood that the emperors were always very closeted and kept behind closed doors and protected, but like I said, I don't know a lot about it, so I can't speak to that. So I'm going to bring up another guy whose face you just want to punch the whole time, and when he finally buys it, you're happy, and that's Tony Goldwyn as Colonel Begley. Yeah, that guy is a complete. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it.
Yes.
He's a douche from beginning to end. You just want him to die, and when he
It's
finally
like, why do
dies,
you hate your own people
Yeah.
so much? Because of you. That's the
Yeah.
answer. You. Because of you.
but at the same time, I think we have to give credit where credit is due, because yes, he's playing a part that is written for him, but if you don't play that part effectively, you're not going to be anywhere near as hated as you need to be. And everything that this guy does in his mannerism is in his arrogance, in a way that how
Incompetence.
dismissive he is of the samurai and everything else, in every sense of the being. You can see it in his whole fiber. Like, he just automatically assumes, just by his American oblige as he stands there, that he is better, and that is exuded through his performance. And I think that is very effective for the story, is a very effective on screen, and it makes you hate the character, which was the whole point. The
It
whole
takes-
It
point
also
is-
leads into one of my favorite lines from the movie, which is, if you want me to kill Japos, I'll kill Japos. If you want me to kill enemies of Japos, I'll kill enemies of Japos. But you, I would happily kill for free.
Right.
That was so great.
Why did he need to be hated?
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. There are two main characters that really need to be hated in this movie. One is Colonel Begley from Tony Goldwyn. The other one is Omura, played by Masato Harada.
Right.
Another punchable face.
Yeah,
Dutch royalist.
And the way he plays it. And it's because those two are representing, one is Begley represents Western imperialism coming into Japan and trying to influence Japan and the emperor. And then Omura represents
he's the new
bringing
status
work
quo.
on.
Yeah, he represents progress, trying to erase the past in Japan. So both of them represent not only characters who are detestable, I mean, they're detestable by their own actions, but they represent ideas that are being fought against in the movie. So they really are symbolic in a lot of ways.
Well, they're oppressors. They're even in their subtleties, they're oppressors. They're not there. They're there because they want their last hurrah. I mean, basically,
Right.
and that's humanity in a sense.
In answer to Mike's question, even though this is a semi-historical narrative, and it's about a doomed culture, being left behind as the greater, broader culture proceeds forward. It's still from an audience perspective, it's still a good idea to give us a villain as a focal point. Even though we can take the larger things, perhaps it might become too depressing if you don't have that, even though that's true to life very often. But having a focal point, it sort of helps the audience go along the way. Just like editing out, showing the samurai doing an honor killing for insolence. You have these people, and it takes a great deal of skill and a certain amount of bravery to play a villain, because people can't seem to isolate the idea of the actor from the character very often. If you look at the case of my favorite villain, because he was the most hateable of all villains, and all of us couldn't wait for this little shit to die. The kid who played Joffrey Baratheon
Yeah.
on Game of Thrones was without a doubt the most hated character on that show of all the villains, topping Cersei, the Mountain, everybody. We all could not wait to see this kid get his just desserts, and you were never sure if he would, because that's the kind of writer that George R. R. Martin is. But when he did, oh my God, it was so cathartic. But the poor guy had to step out of acting for some years because people hated him so much. He was too good at his job.
Well, a lot of the villains in that show. I mean, I remember the first John Wick movie, I can't remember the name of the Theon, but I was like,
oh
look, Theon's about to get killed by John Wick, so it's like, unfortunately, it sticks with you.
Paul Reiser. I mean, who would have thought?
I will add one other thing I will add one other thing in answer to Mike. Part of the reason that we need this character to be hated is because he represents everything that Nathan Algren is trying to get away from.
Yes.
You need that Western element of that hateable character, because you need to see up close and personal why he is siding with Katsumoto against his own people. Because he needs to see that the people that are supposedly his people are really horrible people, and you need to be able to have a face to that.
Well, not only that, his station, the station he is securing in the destruction of this culture, it also transcends, because he already did his damage in the United States.
Yeah.
And that's relevant. And it's just like, hey, it's another job. Let's move on. It's not even, it's an afterthought to him. And I think that makes it poignant when they mention Custer. So he's on the same lines as Custer, and we all know Custer wasn't a great guy. And it's, I think that's poignant when they started pointing that out, that's fiction. That's narrative. You don't want to be like that. You don't want to be anything like that guy. And the guy we're fighting against is like that guy.
This guy is literally genocide for hire.
Yeah.
Yep. So, finally, I want to get into production. I've got 4 parts that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to go to each of you in turn to kind of comment on those different parts. And I'm going to start with Steve and writing. So what did you think about the writing on this film? The script, how they built the story, the characters, all of those various aspects. What did you think about how that was done?
I think it was generally pretty good. You definitely see that the characters all have a character arc, and I'm in agreement with Lance. There's not a lot that is very tropey or very predictable. You really are expecting to see Tom Cruise be the savior. You're definitely expecting him to be the hero of the movie. I mean, it's Tom Cruise; he's the guy on the marquee, but that's not the case. It is definitely the story about Katsumoto. How this person learns to embrace his death. They have very similar arcs, or shall we say opposite arcs, where Cruise is looking for something to live for, and Katsumoto is looking for an honorable death. I mean, and so, ultimately he finds that in the service of the Emperor. He's willing to give his life for the Emperor. He's just looking for the right reason to give his life if he must, for the good of others. And you can kind of see that friendship is really what saves Japan. It's not one alone or the other alone. They both need each other, because it's that cultural division between them, or that cultural difference between them, that allows them to grow together. But what do they have in common? They're both warriors. And not only they're warriors that are looking for an honorable cause, something to fight for. And peace from the deaths that they've caused. I mean, they both talk about how they haven't slept well because of that, and Algren doesn't start really sleeping well until after he goes into the village in captivity, and then he starts finally having more restful sleep, because he's found peace within himself and a place to belong, and a place that speaks to who he is at his core. I mean, that is just a brilliant arc. And, you have a lot of different, thematic elements, the idea of progress versus tradition. And both sides are right and both sides are wrong in some respects, and they show that. It's like, yeah, it's nice to have howitzers and steamships and technology, but what are you losing? You're losing the soul of your country. But at the same time, they're not completely right either, because it's like, look at what they're giving up. Why are you saying that you have to use that? Why are you turning away guns? And things like that. So yeah, there's definitely modern conveniences, modern medicine, things like that. So it's an argument, that definitely can be made, and they balance both sides. They never say one is better than the other. Both have to come together for Katsumoto's people to be saved, and I think that comes together really well as a story.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I would agree.
That's what I've tried to live my life on now. It's difficult, but all things in balance. That's
Right.
and I mentioned at the beginning, Zen Buddhism, and that is really one of the philosophies of being Zen Buddhist, is trying to live your life in harmony and balance. So it's sounds easy. It's like Bruce Lee said, effortless effort. It's one of those things that sounds easy and you want to make it look easy, but it is much more difficult than it seems. I'm going to go to Lance next, and because I'm going to go to Jeff last, I think, or next to last. Lance, this movie, I think, is beautifully shot, but I was wondering if you could touch on what you saw from a filmmaker's perspective on a couple things. One is the shots themselves. I mean, this was shot on film. I think it uses the exact same camera that they used on Hidalgo. It's right around the same period. But not only that, wardrobe and production, building of the sets and everything. I think it was a very beautiful film in that manner as well. So I wanted to get your take on it from a filmmaker's eye.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's extremely well shot, and the production value is absolutely top notch. And there are aspects of it that are very 2003, like when he's first entering in Japan, and we get a few of those CGI shots and it stacks, it stands out like a sore thumb when he's approaching Tokyo, and it's like, on
the ship.
Yeah, and it's like, that's 2003. You could see that they could have worked around that. They could have did something better than that.
Yeah.
But that was the technology of the time, and I can see why they had to use it. But overall, I mean, beautifully shot. Key lights. You can see the whites of the eyes. With overcast. I mean, the colors, they bleed off the screen. The armor. Even their hair isn't so perfectly clean. You know what I mean? It doesn't look like they all stepped out of a shower. It's I love the idea of a little bit of that dirt. And the contrast of the American Union uniform versus the robes and the armor. I mean, all that's eye candy, and that's the dream. When you're shooting a period piece like that, that's the dream. You want those performers in those costumes because it changes them.
They even washed out and sun bleached his dress blues.
Nice.
His blues with the yellow stripe in his uniform.
Look used.
Yeah.
Wonderful attention to detail.
Yes, and I think that's what's missing today, because people are afraid to do period pieces. And if they do period pieces, it looks like everything has just been taken off of a rack. And it's like, what? You could see the perfect seam lines. You can see everything. It's like, that sucks me out of a period piece. Whereas this, you knew that the robes were designed for functionality and comfort. And that's what it looks like. When Tom Cruise puts one on, he's a changed person. He's out of his stiff uniform, which is designed for you to sleep out in the open and all that stuff. But you have house clothes, and then you have the clothes you are out in the world. That's the polite society. The armor was fantastic. I really loved how they had the rouge colored armor for him. And I thought, the masks, the face masks that they have too, of the gargoyles. I mean, come on, samurais are just as sexy as cowboys. I'll say it over and over. That's a dream, to do a samurai movie. I mean, I love the way this film looked.
Yeah, and I have to say that each unique look that was developed for each of the samurai was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. Hiroyuki Sanada, his look with the huge horns and everything. I mean, he just looked like a giant demon, right
Yeah,
now.
you know, it's like Viking. It's like ancient Greece. You know, it's a costume. It is designed to strike fear. So, and in the opening shots when they first meet them in battle, and you see them
Oh man,
approaching,
comes riding out of the mist.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is
Beautiful.
that is top-notch photography there. That is
Yeah.
extremely difficult to do with the light and all that smoke to get the exposures correct and to pull focus. I mean, once again, it's not pixelizing like HD does. You know, it isn't going in and out of focus because the automatic focus doesn't know where to focus at. There's someone pulling focus there. I mean, once again, this is top-notch filmmaking, and we can't lose this art. We can't lose it. I mean, I've been in a festival where somebody has blatantly said, don't work with kids, animals, and don't do a period piece because it'll ruin your project. I had to stand up on stage
Cowardly.
and win an award and say, yeah, you can shoot anything you want so long as you're prepared. I did a period piece, and I did the fourth thing that people are saying you shouldn't do. I shot on film.
Yeah.
And the audience lit up, and I was surprised because I was being a little sarcastic. But people were clapping, and I was like, okay. And I walked away because it's like, no, man, you know, you can't shit on that. This is why you're making a movie. This is why a person buys a ticket and sits in that seat. This is what it's all about.
And that scene you were referencing, to everybody who hasn't seen this movie, if you watch any scene, watch that scene where the samurai come out of the mist.
Oh man, that is so beautiful.
It-
Like you said, there's Sonata in his great horned helm. He's wearing the Oni mask, and he looks like a mythical monster in slow-mo coming out of the fog. Oh,
And-
it's glorious.
And not only that, the movie making that goes into that, because before you ever see them, it's and I know Mike will appreciate this. It's that horror suspense building because you hear the roar of the samurai and their retainers in the back, and they're scaring the living
hoofbeats and the
crap
rattle and all that
out
stuff.
of the peasants there as they're preparing to meet this force. So I mean, there's some true horror filmmaking there. You couldn't have been more scared if Jason Voorhees had come out of that mist, let alone these samurai. So and I know Mike will appreciate that. So with that, the next part that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to go directly to Jeff here, talk about the fight choreography and the martial arts in this movie. So,
man, I was hoping you'd pitch this to me. I found the fight choreography to be superb, and here's one of the reasons why. Obviously, you got people like Sonata on there. Ken Watanabe has shown time and time again in films that he is no stranger to the blade. I don't know if he has any background in martial arts, but he's obviously quite teachable. Tom Cruise, we know, is a phenom. Anything he wants to do, he will do. I mean, he learned how to fly jet planes, for God's sakes. He just does things. Tom just does things. Maybe Scientology works. I don't know, but he's doing it.
Works for him, at least.
But here's what I have to say about the choreography. Now, I have not, in fact, studied Japanese martial arts, but I'm quite familiar with them, given my broad love for martial arts. My particular study has been in American martial arts and in mostly Korean martial arts, so that's my foundation. But there's only so many ways you can move your limbs, and so there's always going to be some level of overlap. And what I see in the choreography in this film, and this is something else that breaks the trope, they are not doing high-flying wire work wuxia. They're not doing John Wick insanity. As much as I love that, as much as they tried to do practical stuff with John Woo, they also do stuff that's, inhuman. This looks genuine. When I'm watching the sparring between Tom Cruise and Sonata, and, when Sonata's just dogging him out time and time again until Tom catches up, I believe the progression as I watch it. I watch Tom getting better. When I'm watching the opening scenes with a samurai coming out of the mist and they're decimating this poorly trained regiment who, they're expecting their guns to do everything, and they don't know how to effectively fight with their bayonets. If they were, now in reality, in history, these guys were already tested in a number of uprisings. They were battle tested. It would not have gone down like that. But in the film, it plays out beautifully for the purposes of the narrative that these guys have lost their martial training. their melee martial training. They are all ranged fighters now, even though they have bayonets fixed, and so they get completely dominated by the samurai in a completely believable way. And even when they decided to bring in ninja, because ninja were a thing, they treat them as non-mystical assassins. Thank you, Jesus. And Tom's fight with them, even with an element as fantastic as ninja, they are treated with that reality base, which is what this film is striving for so often. And again, I'm looking at it and I'm not seeing flashy techniques that are useless. In Japanese martial arts, there's like specifically like one of my teachers was an Okinawan instructor, and a big thing of theirs, like it was brief, it was not my main study, mind you, but there's a philosophy of no wasted motion. And when I watch that, I'm seeing that here, and I'm even seeing something that Akira Kurosawa would bring to his samurai fights in his films, because they weren't always perfect and beautiful. You would see guys stumble and lose their footing and have to recover in awkward positions. And I see that here when Tom is, especially when he's fighting with the ninja. He takes a knee. He goes down and he's got to survive that situation, and it all is believable. And I love this film for having that authenticity, because I see a lot of guys who are into martial arts and swords and on YouTube, and one of our biggest gripes as a community is, as much as we love seeing the cool Jedi lightsaber, like Celine from Underworld flying around, all this wuxia inspired stuff, we want to see more reality based martial arts, because you can make that look really cool if you're willing to do it. And this director was willing to do it, and it pays off wonderfully.
Well, it's the idea of making it cinematic versus
Yes.
showy. Now,
Right.
the showy aspect of it, to me, is it. If I'm going into a movie like John Wick and I'm going to see gun fu, I know what I'm getting into. I absolutely know, and you embrace it.
But here we're doing a historical piece,
right? And now looking at this film, it's like, okay, you can see the camera setups, you can see the eye lines just right, you can see that they framed it so that the moves are poignant and they look cinematic. And that's a difficult thing to do, because sometimes you think your audience is conditioned for something bigger and better. But it's like, just look at regular knockdown, drag out fights like a Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's that's all you need cinematically.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be anything more unless your movie is based upon it. But even that gets really tired. So, and this movie being 2 hours and 30 minutes long didn't feel like it, because they didn't play into those ridiculous story tropes, and they didn't linger on things they didn't need to. It's called good pacing, good editing, good writing. It worked out very well. I mean, no good movies too long, no bad movies too short. But when I looked at the clock, I'm like, wow, this movie was 2 hours and 30 minutes long. Okay, didn't feel like it.
Yeah. Now let me punctuate with this last thing, this big gripe that has popped up in a lot of modern films. And thankfully, John Wick did break away from that tradition. There was a time when somebody decided that everybody needed to be more ADHD, and you would have these rapid fire cuts and the dreaded shaky cam. When I think about the first Bourne movie, when I get to see Matt Damon doing these wonderful martial arts, these largely practical martial arts moves as a secret agent, and then each film, it gets worse and worse and worse, because they want a quick cut. They want to move the film. And you watch the behind the scenes and you see like Matt, worked his butt off to get these moves down. And as somebody who is trained in martial arts, I want to see that, but I can't decipher any of that. I stopped watching the Bourne movies after the second one because I couldn't stand the camera work anymore. And thank God they didn't do that here.
I blame Ridley Scott and Gladiator for the shaky cam. So.
Actually, I don't think Gladiator was bad as far as like shots, but I do think as far as like naturalistic, realistic combat shot as good as can be, I think this movie is probably in my top 3.
Yeah, and Ridley Scott did that mistake of doing optical slow motions, because I don't know if he didn't have enough light. I didn't know what that stood out to us when we watched it in the theater. We were like, why is he doing an optical slow-mo here? Just keep it normal speed. It's too distracting. Do that for a science fiction movie or something. But the guy that stands out to me with the shaky cam And we used to always say, even on my set, let's do the Michael Bay. He's the guy that just got ridiculous with shaking that camera.
Oh man, I saw like a little clip of like Zack Snyder's zombie heist movie that was on Netflix, and there's
Army
actually
of the Dead.
yeah, there's actually a clip of him smacking the side of the camera. I'm like,
that's what you do.
Boo, boo,
So
boo.
we were doing that like in a car setup. We had it all set up. We had a polarizer. We're shooting through the windshield of a car. We had people waving flags in front of lights to make it look like.
Yeah.
And then every now and again, I'd say, "Don't forget to do the Michael Bay." So my cameraman would just tap the end of the end of the tripod. Just tap it once in a while, just to do a little bit. But
It's like your car's going over a slightly uneven road. You don't need much. Now, when I did a shot like that in mine, I had a couple of guys behind the car, and they would lean on the bumper every now and again.
Right, because
that was my trick.
But we were always like, just a little bit of Michael Bay, do a little bit of Michael Bay. You know what I mean? And me and my camera guy knew exactly. He was like, okay, I get it.
I will say, just to add into what Jeff was saying, as someone who did study judo and kendo for the better part of 20 years, Japanese martial arts is very grounded and very brutal and quick. So fights that are based on Japanese martial arts, they're not these long drawn out things. They are things that are quick and usually end in a very brutal outcome. And so they did that. They captured that essence.
Let me bring up one more example. When I first watched Kill Bill parts 1 and 2, it was totally wuxia, like the high wire wushu kung fu sort of thing. And then we get to the very
it's
end.
very Wo Ping. I mean,
he was one of the choreographers on the film. And by the time you get to the second film, I wasn't prepared for it. It had shifted from a kung fu movie into a Western. And, when Uma Thurman has her showdown, I was initially disappointed because I was expecting this cool, long, drawn-out fight. And I had to process later, like, no, this is a gunfight. This is a Western. And that's how Japanese fights are, because they put everything into one shot. It's one hit, one kill. It's not like the kung fu movies where you beat somebody to death with multiple hits. They want to crush your skull or cave in your chest with the one shot. And it's the same thing when you're holding a 3-foot razor. You're going to end the guy in one cut, or he's going to end you in one cut.
Right. And I think that came across very well, even to the point where when they had the people training in the village with the sword, I mean, those are actual kendo, training routines that you go through and do. So, and, looking across, I've got my bokken. It's sitting over there against the wall. So, it's been well used. And I loved it when the kids were fighting with the bokken, the wooden swords and everything. So that was
really cool. You have a shinai as well?
Yes, I do.
All right.
I used to fight.
You and me, brother.
I would fight two-handed sometimes, which is a style of fighting that most people don't know.
Nitu Ryu.
Yeah, it's really
developed
cool.
by Musashi, who was actually influenced by seeing Westerners fight with sword and dagger.
Yep. And Musashi is a great character. In fact, I would love to do. I think there's a good movie about that we might do sometime. That would be cool.
Oh, the one with Toshiro Mifune?
Yep.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about is locations in this film. This film was filmed on location in Japan, New Zealand, and then on the backlot in I think it was Paramount's backlot in the United States. I thought the locations that they picked were very effective. As we were talking about before we came on air, New Zealand has this weird quality of being the chameleon that 90% of the time, gives you a good location. Lance pointed out how they tried to portray the Rocky Mountains in New Zealand once, and it didn't turn out so well. And I think the thing I wanted to point out, real quick on location, and I think is so effective is, Lance pointed out that they did the CGI for when they were coming into the harbor. I think there's a lot of ways they could have done it. I agree with Lance. I think they could have done a map painting. I think they could have done maybe some green screen. They could have done miniatures.
Yep.
There's a whole host of things they could have done. However,
even a composite with reverse projection would have been better.
To their credit, feudal, this period in Tokyo, you're going to have Mount Fuji. But they couldn't film that on location anywhere in Tokyo because Tokyo is so built up now that it's not you can't find that. You're not going to get that shot. Today's day and age, they would have just CGI'd it. you know, and I think it would have suffered. Instead, what they did is they did location scouting, and they found a mountain in New Zealand that looks remarkably similar to Mount Fuji. And then they went and built a period, uh, a slice of time of Tokyo right there in front of their faux Mount Fuji in New Zealand and filmed it that way. And that dedication to filmmaking and location scouting, I think, is another lost art, because the fact is, if you get a good location scout, that can make or break your film.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you're going out there, and that is another one of those lost arts now where they're like, oh, we don't need to do that. We'll just CGI it. And I'm sorry, if you can find the real deal, it cannot be replaced by CGI. The real locations to film at, you're going to get better acting performances. You're going to get better light, from the filmmakers. You're going to get interaction with the natural environment. You're probably going to get better sound if you want to use the natural sound, or even, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you could go out there and sample the sound and then bring that back in there for tracks for actual nature instead of
record your tone.
artificial. Yeah. So there's all sorts of stuff that you could do that just cannot be replicated digitally. And,
and I think the biggest issue is the depth and the weight of things. Like CGI doesn't have a very good depth. Like if you're going to have a city street, there's no depth to it unless it is a rear projection or now the LED projections, or if it's a composite previously filmed and then matted in. There's a depth that is always missing. And I think viewers understand that, but they're now getting to conditions to the point where it's like, well, I got to settle for this because this is what they're giving me. But that depth is important. And not only that haze of real life, especially in the period pieces, fires were always burning somehow, some way. So you need to mist it or you need to smoke it. There's got to be that depth, there has to be that diffusion. And to me, that's part of movie magic. You remanufacture that. It looks real. People enjoy the movie more. That's it.
I mean, look at the hellish landscape on the East Coast right now from the fires. I mean, if I was a filmmaker, I'd be taking B-roll for some future horror movie right now. So.
Absolutely. I thought about that. Take a 35 millimeter camera out. It doesn't even have to be sync sound. It could sound like a lawnmower. Just shoot that footage and it's going to look amazing.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to shoot a dystopian sci-fi piece or just a whole, all sorts of things, that B-roll could be so useful, so if you're a filmmaker on the East Coast, go do it. Go do that right now. Get out there and take some B-roll film, because
you never know when you're going to use it. I filmed the demolition of a building near where I work because, like, when am I going to get this opportunity again? Who knows when I might end up using this.
Right. When we went to the Great Gallery in Utah, I lugged the Super 8 camera in there, but I didn't realize, okay, this is a 10.5 mile hike there and back, and it's in the desert. And I'm like, we're in shape, we can do this, but the camera itself weighs about 6 to 7 pounds, and I had about 6 to 7 pounds of water on me. I lugged that in there just like old school, like they did in the old days. And I got that footage, but I tell you what, I was hurting on the way out. I was like, holy smokes, I'm dying.
Suffer for your art, baby. Suffer for your art.
Yeah, and it's going to look great.
Before we get out of here, let's see what Mike says. I always thought the smoke was about closing the scene, like making it closer and more personal. Is that an aspect of it, Lance? So
it can be.
It can be, but I think it's more about diffusing the light. Diffusing the light and adding depth to whatever sequence you're doing. Like, for instance, we shot in a warehouse once, and my buddy had a smoke machine, and just to add a little bit more depth and mood to it, the guys were smoking. So let's make it look like there's that smoke moving. And on film, it looks fantastic. I think that motion of it too, is just adds texture to the film. So I think in these modern movies, when they don't have a smoke machine and they're doing a period piece or something, and it looks so crystal clear and perfect, it's like, no, it shouldn't look like a Saturday morning kids show. I think it's designed also to kind of, when it adds that depth, like when you go out to outside of your house right now or something after a fresh rain, you can see the mist coming off the street. You can see how it diffuses the light, but yet the light is more vibrant because of that fresh rain, the reflections. So It's a tool that's used for mood. I don't often use it, but when I see people do it, I'm for it. I'm like, okay, it needs to happen here. I mean, it's a fun thing to have.
Now, what you're talking about, Mike, is like in the scene where the samurai comes through. This creates focus because the samurai breaks through, and you might also see that in it might be Friday the 13th Part 5 when Jason stands atop the wrecked van. There's all this smoke coming from the vehicle that frames him. It narrows the focus down on him, but in a small setting, like Lance might have been using, that diffusion takes a tiny room and makes it look like a warehouse because you don't know how far back it's going. It's an incredibly useful tool.
Yeah,
I also say not just in writing, but you could use it in writing as well. Fog, like smoke, is very effective. There's something weird about fog where the most mundane thing seen through fog looks
And then
horrifying.
fog
looks terrifying.
Fog also plays with sound.
Yeah.
Because sound waves are bouncing off all these particles of water in the air. So even sound gets weird. That's why fog is so freaking eerie.
Yeah. And so
it's perfect mood setting. It works like that samurai scene. They had to have the mist. They came out of the mist like monsters, and it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, and having been in the woods, in the army and everything else, and at night as the sun's coming up or going down and the fog rolling in, it just does something to you viscerally, whether you want to admit it or not. So
I tell you, like what's crazy is like at night out here, if it rains where I'm at night, and the water has soaked into all these trees, and like I go to take out the trash at night, it becomes eerie after it's rained because you can hear all this dripping, you can hear things falling, you can hear branches cracking because they've got soaked with all this water, and it just feels like everything is about to come down around you. It just changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. That was a wonderful discussion of The Last Samurai. As always, there's so much more we could get into, but I think I could speak for everybody on the panel. If you haven't seen the movie, you owe it to yourself to go pick it up and check it out. It is a very good film, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. So before we go, I want to go around the horn real quick and allow my fellow Cinema Crusaders some final thoughts, and then we are going to get out of here. So, Lance, final thoughts on the film.
Hey, samurais rock, man, and this is a modern movie that shows that. And modern being 20 years old, I mean, check it out. A period piece lives on if it's done right, and this is one of those films that was done right. So I'm glad Shade recommended it. I'm glad I actually watched it. I was skeptical going in, but this is a good pick.
Awesome. Steve, final thoughts.
Yeah, it was really nice revisiting this film, and I will say this is one of those films you watch it again and you get some new details out of it, and you start noticing things you didn't before. And I think that's always a sign of a well-made film, is when you can spot these little tiny details and you can kind of see, yeah, that makes sense, and yeah, that adds to the story, and I think you can always appreciate those things. So it was really nice, and the cast is amazing. You can't, I mean, when Tom Cruise is in it and he's not the central focus at all times, and you have a lot of these supporting players that are doing as well or better, I mean, that again is really, really great. And Tom Cruise rarely misses the mark when he picks his films, and that definitely was true here. This is probably one of his best.
Cool. Final thoughts, Jeff.
This is the best non-Japanese samurai film I could possibly recommend. It is such a love letter to the culture, both to what Japanese has become, Japan has become, and to what it used to be. It's really remarkable. Again, I got to hand it to Cruise for not being an egoist about this, because there are so many actors who would demand to be the central focus all the time, but Cruise is here to serve the story. So hats off to him for that. He allows the other actors room, and hey, go check out Glory, because this director is a guy whose work you should get very familiar with. This is his jam right here.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will say, the last thing I will say before we close out is that this movie, you could tell it was successful because it really felt like for 2 hours and 34 minutes, you were transported to another time, and you were part of that world. And that's some pretty incredible filmmaking. For
it's like Lance says, when you looked at the clock and you're like, it's been 2 hours and you didn't feel it, you're invested in a film.
Yeah. For 2 hours and 34 minutes, the director and his cast opened up a window into an admittedly fictionalized version of this era in Japan and allowed me to watch. And that was an incredibly enjoyable experience. So, yeah, go check it out. So, on behalf of myself, Comic Crusaders, the Cinema Crusaders, thank you so much for watching this episode. We will be back this time next Friday with another film. And I will be putting that up next week once we decide what it is, because we get together as a group. Until then, thank you, Lance. Thank you,
Good to
Steve.
be here.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Jeff.
Same.
Keep that popcorn warm, snuggle up in that comfortable chair, and watch some movies, including The Last Samurai. Until then, on behalf of the Cinema Crusaders, we're out of here, everybody.
See.